Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch. My name is Yuen. I'm a data scientist working for the strategy unit. We're about to have our keynote sessions for the afternoon. A little bit of housekeeping. We've got the chat, but we also have Q&A as well on the tab on the right. So if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in there. Right, so I hope you're all seated comfortably. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the first of the keynote speakers today. It's Sam Riley. Sam Riley has worked in the NHS for almost 30 years in a wide range of improvement roles. She leads the National Making Data Count program and is a passionate advocate for using data to drive meaningful change. Sam has worked with more than 240 NHS boards to strengthen understanding of statistical process control and better decision making. Her talk is entitled Beyond the Dashboard, From Data to Influence, Turning Numbers into Change. Please welcome Sam Riley.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here. Hoping you can see my slides. So I'm just going to jump straight in, I think. There they are. And lovely to be here again speaking to you. Sorted it out. Excellent. So, when I joined NHS Improvement, probably around 9 years ago, there was clearly a problem that needed to be solved. And actually, I'd known about this for longer than 9 years. Now, what was the problem? The problem was that for many, many years, we've been reliant on looking at this type of information to enable people to understand how we were doing in terms of performance on a whole range of different metrics. And probably some of you will have created things like this. You might still be creating things like this, but there is a real problem with them. And look, this is an example, a more recent example, so this clearly still is a problem in some organisations. So this makes Sam sad. Now, you might wonder why at the moment. Some of you might already know. We're going to have a little look in a moment, though. Now, what's the alternative to that RAG reporting? And one of the problems with RAG reporting is that if you're colourblind, you can't see the difference between red and green, so that's not a very helpful start. But what is the alternative? Is there an alternative? Well, there is an alternative. And for those of you that already know about Making Data Count, you will know that the Making Data Count programme primarily focuses on teaching people about this thing called statistical process control, or SPC for short. Now, SPC is not a new thing. It's been around for over 100 years, but we haven't been very good at using it in the NHS or in care settings. Now, why is SPC so useful to us and so important? It's important because it enables us to understand what variation we are seeing in our data, and that's one of the most important things that we need to understand. So if I got the tube into the office every day and I plotted how long it took me to get to work, I'm going to have a chart that probably looks a bit like this. It's not going to take exactly the same time for me to get to work. There's going to be some natural variation, and that's to be expected, isn't it? That's not a surprise. If I drive to work and I encounter a car crash, the orange data point at the end here is when I encountered the car crash, it took me a lot longer to get to work. It was an unusual event, hopefully an unusual event, and I understand what caused it. That's unusual or special cause variation. If I encounter these roadworks when I'm driving to work, it looks like they're going to be going on for a long time, doesn't it? Many, many months. If I plotted my data, this is what it might look like, where the orange dots towards the end of the graph are when I've encountered the roadworks. So this is unusual variation, but it's of a sustained nature. So it's really important that we understand this variation in our processes in the NHS, because then we can act appropriately. Now, Making Data Count was born. Some of you might have even come to the birthday party, because we did have a birthday party when it was 1. And look, we had a couple of wonderful cakes, one in the image of Making Data Count and another one with orange and blue dots inside the cake. Very, very clever. We've now been going for 7 years. It will be 8 years in May. So Making Data Count was born to primarily tackle this problem of that RAG reporting. So we introduced people to statistical process control. We made it really easy for them to understand the charts. So we've got colour conventions of orange for concern, blue for improvement, and grey for nothing changing. And then we introduce summary icons to avoid the necessity of creating hundreds and hundreds of charts. And if you don't know, if you're thinking, I don't know anything about this, Sam, that's fine. We can alert you to training that we run that will enlighten you on why this approach is so important and powerful. So we provided lots of training. We made it easy for people to understand the charts. We provided analyst training, board training. We've trained about 55,000 other people now. What's happened as a result? Well, what we saw was those RAG reports being replaced with making data count visualizations using the colours that colourblind people can understand, and using a range of different visualizations to enable decision makers to make better decisions. And we've seen this happen across the country. Over the summer, we reviewed every trust integrated performance report, and what we found is that most trusts now are using this to some extent, and some trusts at board level are using it exclusively. So that was fantastic news. This independent research that was published last year looked at which boards were using SPC charts, and look at what they found. They found that this is now becoming a new standard of reporting, and that should say NHS trusts rather than hospital trusts, because this is happening across the board. But there has been more global reach than just in England, so that's very exciting. So I wonder if any of you know what language this is. I'm guessing that probably most people don't, so I'm going to reveal it because I'm mindful of time. This is Norwegian. So just over a year ago, Making Data Count was launched in Norway. And here's a nice picture from the event. That was very exciting. And then only this week, I had an email letting me know about the newest converts. So has anybody been to Rottnest Island in Western Australia? Of course, they developed the wonderful custom visual for us. So look, Quokkas are even using Making Data Count. How fantastic is that? Now, in the bad old days, if we look at this example, we've got everything looking green. So the manager, Sam, would think, this is fantastic. There's nothing to worry about here. Let's move on to something else. SPC shone a light on the data. This is the same data over an extended period of time. We can see where the target is. Our icons assure us we're going to consistently pass the target, but the orange dots are telling us we've got deterioration in the data. It's a very different message, isn't it? My goodness, something has happened. We need to take action. So that's an immediate problem with those RAG reports. It masks the variation that we need to be understanding. Now, even worse was this situation. Now, I wonder if any of you have seen this on your travels. We've missed the target, we need to act. And then maybe the next month or a couple of months later, we're going to have a different reaction. Well, we fixed the problem. That's a relief, isn't it? That's fantastic. I'm wondering if you can guess when these different reactions are occurring. Well, I reckon you can, because of course, if we turn green, having been red, we're going to think that we fixed the problem. And then if we turn red after we've been green, we're going to have that panic. And that's been a real problem, flip-flopping between those different reactions. Because of course, people get sent off to act and do things when we suddenly have a panic. If we look at the same data as an SPC chart, this is what we see. We can see where the target line is. We can see that we're going to achieve the target sometimes, but not always. And we've got almost continual unchanging variation here. So it's a bit of a kind of pick and mix, a bit random about when we're going to achieve the target. And now I've had my SPC training, I feel terrible because now I know that I've been spuddling. If you don't know what spuddling is, join our training courses. And I've been creating chaos. I've been overreacting when we've just been seeing that natural variation. So here's our Mr. Spuddle character that we have on our spuddling cards that you can order. So this has been a real problem. Now, why on earth would you do this? So we've got a RAG summary and we've got alongside that those SPC charts. And I've shown you two examples where they're showing very different messages, aren't they? This is actually what a trust created when we did our IPR review. This is what we saw. And we got a bit sad about that, to be honest. And we wondered if it was just that trust that was going down this road But because we reviewed every trust reports, this is what we saw. So it wasn't just a problem for one organisation, it was a problem for very, very many. So this was my reaction to finding that. It made me really, really sad. And hopefully you understand now why, because we've seen the problem with those RAG reporting. Why has this happened? I suspect it's happened because somebody has come along, potentially a non-exec director. Maybe they've been used to seeing RAG reporting. Maybe they don't know about SPC charts. And maybe nobody has explained to them how to interpret these charts, and they've wanted to go back to their comfort blanket of the things that they know. I imagine that that's probably why we've seen this this kind of journey of RAG reporting to wonderful SPC charts, then back to this very strange and unhelpful combination. So that's my hunch. Maybe some of you have had this experience. You can explain to me why. But I suppose for me, the more important question is how can we avoid this happening in the future? Because there's a real danger, I think, that we slip backwards and then SPC is no more. And that's where all of you come in. So this is when I attended the AFA conference, I think it was last year, not 100% sure, where I met these lovely ladies from Moorfields, and they're making data count fans. And actually, they've got a fantastic integrated performance report. So if anybody's on from Moorfields, absolutely fabulous work. Because I think you're in very powerful positions to enable us to not take that retrograde step, and to enable us to ensure that managers and clinicians at whatever seniority get information which will inform a decision. So that's why I'm excited about speaking to you today. So I think in your powerful positions, you need a few things to ensure that if we use my example of those RAG rated reports alongside the SPC charts, we don't take that retrograde step. Now, the first thing I think that you need is knowledge. So you need to know, in my example, about what SPC is and why it's important and why RAG rating is a problem. But if we think more broadly, there's, of course, I know many more analytical techniques. You need to know about them, don't you, to be able to suggest them and propose that this is a better way of looking at your data. And of course, we have the competency framework, and I'm sure that over the coming years, there's going to be lots more in terms of support and courses that you can go on to expand your learning. So I think if you're going to be really impactful as an analyst, then you need to really look at focusing on enhancing your knowledge. That's a really critical first step, but that's not enough from my perspective. Knowledge isn't enough, and doing a fancy dashboard, that isn't enough. If we think about my example, when somebody's coming to say, can you please add in that RAG summary to those SPC charts, it is going to take courage, isn't it, to not just go ahead and do it. And I started off by thinking that you needed to be brave, and then I looked up the difference between bravery and courage, and bravery is about spontaneous action, which is bold. But courage is something when you're going to kind of take a step back and you're going to go ahead and you're going to provide some gentle challenge. You're going to enter into a debate. You're not doing that in a spontaneous way. You're doing that in a planned way. So I think here we're really looking at courage rather than bravery. And you don't need to be really loud being courageous. You don't always need to be the most confident person. You can be quietly courageous, but I do think you're in critical roles to be able to push back if you get a request that comes in like that. Because the organisations that we just looked at there, they all knew about SPC charts. They had SPC charts in their report, and yet the person that was in charge of actually creating the reporting went ahead and made those changes, which caused a problem. Now, of course, you're going to have to be confident, aren't you? It is difficult to challenge somebody, particularly difficult, I think, if you're looking to challenge somebody who is more senior. But you need to have confidence in yourself. You need to believe that you can do it. You need to believe that it's going to be possible to actually change somebody's mind. But of course, you need to be careful about how you do that. You don't want to come across as really arrogant. You need to think about how you approach that person, and I think you need to do it with humility, but you need to have that confidence, believe in yourself. But if you're going to try and change somebody's mind about something, you need to have a coherent story, don't you? You need to have a solid line of why you're pushing back on the request that is coming, regardless of what type of request it is. So that's where I think you need to do some planning. For me, if it was me, I'd be using some examples like the two that I've used in this presentation today to demonstrate to people what the problem is. So I think that's going to be really important, that you plan having the conversation that you're going to have, which is pushing back against a request that isn't the most useful type of request. You know that there's a better way of doing things, but you're going to have to demonstrate through a kind of planned line of reasoning. And of course, you're going to have to think about your timing, because picking your moment is pretty important. Might be quite difficult to get time with people, particularly if they're senior. But if this is important enough, and I would argue that in this example it is important enough, you need to try and get time with that individual, and you need to present your case. But let's be honest, you might need to be persistent. In addition, and we've had to be really persistent in the Making Data Count team to get to the position where we are now. We could have given up at the first hurdle, and then we wouldn't be in a position where we've got organisations making much better decisions. So don't give up if you don't succeed in the first place. So obviously, I talk about RAG rating and SPC charts, but of course there are many other horrible types of visualisations. So here's a few from me that I don't think are the most helpful. And maybe if you're creating something, you should have a little test in your head. How is somebody going to interpret this, and how are they going to act? If you're asked to create things like this, then I'm interested to know, and look, I've saved the best to last here. I'm not quite sure what that's showing, but it's kind of interesting. If you're asked to create things like that, what is your reaction? You can have a little think. What do you do? And I reckon there's probably a variety of reactions. And some of you might have these types of reactions right now, or you might have had them in the past. So excited about my request, going to give me exactly what I've asked for. Love helping me out, that's fabulous. Want to deliver my request as quickly as possible, want to give a good impression. So I reckon maybe some of you are having reactions potentially like that. Now, some of you might have reactions like this, or even a more extreme reaction there. People are always asking us to do silly things. It's not helpful. I'm getting really fed up. I know that this isn't going to make a difference. It's not going to help with a decision. Not sure how much longer I can deal with this. Some of you might take it home and you might moan to your partner about it over dinner, or you might moan to your colleagues when you're having a cup of tea. But then maybe some of you would have reactions like this. And look, there's many types of superheroes here. So what are they thinking? Well, there's a better way of doing things. I might be able to influence Sam to become a better decision maker. I'm going to make it my mission to change Sam's mind. And look, the most radical one of all, thanks for the email that you sent, Sam, but I think it would be useful if we had a chat about it, because then they're going to be able to deliver me a much better product. So I reckon that those are probably the actions that you might be having. So where are you on the scale? Well, I asked Adam. Some of you might know Adam, who's one of the analysts in the Making Data Count team. Here he is saying hello. And I asked him that very question. And what he said to me is he thought that his career, he'd been on a bit of a journey. So let's see what Adam's journey was. So when Adam was a baby analyst at the start of his career, who's probably at the start here wanting to please people like Sam. And then he moved up into that kind of middle ground where he was a bit annoyed about what he was being asked to do, but he didn't have the confidence to challenge back. And now I can guarantee you he's definitely in the position. Not that I'm ever, of course, going to ask him to do something silly. That just wouldn't happen. He's now moved to this ground of being able to challenge back if he's asked to do something silly. And my challenge to all of you is that's what I'd like you to all get to. I think you're going to have much more enjoyable jobs if you do that. I think that you're going to be really respected as individuals, and you're going to be able to have a big impact on the decisions that are being made in your organisation. That's the challenge that I really want to leave you with. So I need you all to become my superheroes, and obviously we've got a range of superheroes that are available to us. You can pick what type of superhero you want to be. You're going to need to have a cape anyway, I think. Clearly I've got a Making Data Count cape on that you can't see because it's invisible. But if you can step up and become those superheroes and challenge when you're asked to do things that are silly, when you know there's a better way to do things, then who's going to ultimately benefit from that? Well, of course, it's going to be the patients and the people that work in care settings across social care that are going to be benefiting. So that's my challenge that I want to leave you with. I think we might have a little bit of time for questions. So I'm just finishing with my very fancy thank you slide that's got Making Data Count colours. And I'm going to pass back to whoever's in charge that can do whatever they need to do.
Hi, thank you so much, Sam. That was great. You can see all the applause starting to roll in. We had some really nice comments earlier as well. I'm not sure if you can see the chat around how good the training was from people who've been on the training, and people are happy to spot themselves as well in your photo earlier from the AFA conference. We've had a question in the Q&A from Josefa. What practical steps can analytical teams take to earn trust and credibility among clinical and operational leaders so that data-driven insight becomes part of everyday decision-making?
Okay, so I think the first thing, great question, by the way. I think the first thing is to build relationships with them. Because I think and I know sometimes that can be difficult and everybody's busy, you're busy as analysts, but of course clinicians and managers are busier too as well. But I think the important thing is that you start to build relationships with people. Now, you're probably all too young to remember strategic health authorities, but I used to work in one of those. They were kind of regional bodies that covered a few counties. And one of the things that I did when I had an analytical team back then was align them to different clinical areas. And that meant that they could start to really understand the services that they were supporting. So maybe if you were supporting the dementia programme that was a priority at the time, you could start to learn a lot more about dementia and what the treatment plan looked like. And you would start to talk to and deal with clinicians that were experts in that area. And I think that was highly beneficial, both for the clinicians, but also for the analysts, because the analysts ended up with much more interesting jobs. They could start to see how their analysis could impact that. The clinicians, of course, they're experts in their clinical areas, but they're not experts in terms of the data. So they won't know necessarily what's available to them, and they might not know how you could help them. So I would say reach out, start building relationships with people. I think your role should be partly educational as well. So rather than just analysing information, you're there to hold people's hands and to take them through it and to guide them in terms of, what might be a better approach. Because sometimes, and you might have experienced this, some of you, I reckon probably all of you have, quite often you might get silly requests or things that aren't going to be that helpful. So I think, that's why I said in my presentation, that kind of courage. I know it's difficult, particularly if you're a bit more junior or you haven't got that many years experience, but I'd say be courageous and take that step. And that's how I think you build that relationship. Differently, then I think that's when you're going to really be seen as added value and you're going to really, really help them. It's all about people, isn't it? Numbers are important, but it's all about people.
Thank you. That was great. We've also had another question from Stuart about AI and the role of AI in all of this, and especially in data literacy. I think that's quite a tricky one.
Well, that's an interesting question. There are lots of opportunities clearly with AI, but I'm not sure that AI is going to fix the kind of education piece for us. Because I think if you're going to be successfully educating people and building relationships, I think it needs to be more than AI. Again, it's back to the people, isn't it? AI is not going to be able to replace the relationships that we have with people. I'm sure it has its place. Of course, it could have its place in SPC charts because it can enable an interpretation very easily, can't it, of what's happening in terms of the data, how likely are we to achieve the target, are we improving or deteriorating? And actually, we probably don't even need AI for that. But what AI can't do is explain what the causes of changes in data. That needs to be that conversation with people. But let's see what happens over the next few years. I'll be retired by then probably, so because I'm getting old.
Thank you so much. We've got time for another question here, one from Stephen. And he's asking, what skills do you think we need to investigate the causes of special cause variation?
Of special cause, was that?
Of special cause variation. I guess he's asking about once we've the statistical process control
So again,
charts.
bit of a
Sure.
common theme.
Sorry.
Okay, so I think I've got the question. So clearly as analysts, you're going to be best placed people to be able to identify that there is special cause variation. But I would be highly doubtful that you are going to understand what the cause of that change was. And again, that's where you're going to need to forge those relationships with people that are working within that service to try and understand what are the causes that, what's the implications, because it's going to be your clinical and operational managers that are going to know the answer to that, because they're close to the service, aren't they? Whereas you're going to be a bit further removed. So again, build those relationships. I think that's the most important thing. Your technical expertise is absolutely critical, but if you're really going to deploy that to have maximum benefit in terms of helping patients and people that require a range of different services, then I think you need to take that kind of maybe sometimes scary books and invest a bit more in terms of the kind of the people side of things.
Perfect. Thank you. And I had a question as well, if that's okay. I guess something that's come up in some of the other talks that we've had is the value of qualitative data as well. So what do you think we can do to help the NHS make the most of the qualitative data that we've got?
Yes, a very important point. And actually, one of the training modules that we run currently is focused on qualitative data. It's a very, very different skill set. And I think it's probably quite a rare skill set. We've run step 9, which is all about qualitative data, quite a number of times now. And we tend to get a couple of hundred people attend each of those sessions. And we ask people, how many qualitative analysts are there working in your organisation? And the answer is generally none at all. I'm not an expert around qualitative data at all, but I do know that it's a very different skill set that requires quite extensive training. So I think that we're going to need to look at how we invest in that over time, and maybe that is an area where AI could help in the future. But I think my qualitative colleagues might disagree with you and have a debate with you on that one. But it's a really important point. But, you know, we can combine stories with the hard data that we've got, can't we? I think that's really powerful if we can combine a patient story with some hard data, then we win the kind of hearts and minds.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's the way, isn't it? It's combining the expertise and using mixed methods. But I think we're basically bang on time. Thank you so much, Sam. That's been a really awesome talk. Really appreciate your time and, you know, all your expertise. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you again, I'm sure, quite soon.